So one of the most powerful saving tool in Canada has to be the RRSP. It basically does everything. It gives you tax saving up front, gives you tax deferred growth, you can take it back out for your first home, and even for your continued education. The only caveat with it is that when you withdraw it, it will count as your income. Now, because it is a taxable income when you draw it out, it may affect some of your retirement benefits like OAS or GIS. And because of this, a lot of people are confused once they retire when they should be drawing their RRSP. Basically, there are two camps of people generally when I talk to them about retirement. One is in the camp of, hey, I need to draw them out as soon as possible. I need to empty this RRSP account so then I can get maximum government benefit. On the other hand, we have people saying we should be delaying RRSP until we're 71 so we get that maximum tax deferred growth and we can push tax back as much as possible. Okay, well, so which side is right here? Well, that's what this week's video will be about. We'll be dissecting both sides, taking a look at the pros and cons, and then we'll be visiting an example to see which one actually plays out better, or is there a third option? Finally, we'll be discussing some things that you want to keep in mind when deciding which strategy is more applicable to your situation. Before we start, if you haven't already, make sure you help me comment, like, and share this video. This is the best way to help this channel. And also join our private Facebook group if you want more content and ask more questions inside. The link to join is in the description below. Alright, so let's dive into both sides, and we first going to start with the camp that says, let's take out RRSP aggressively early on. So this group are the ones that are saying, let's melt down our RRSP before we hit the retirement age or very early into our retirement, so then we have not much RRSP to draw from. We can either do a direct RRSP meltdown, meaning that we just directly withdraw, we'll pay that tax up front, or we can do something called leverage RRSP meltdown. This is something we talked about before in my channel. This is where we go get an investment loan on the side, so we have interest payment into the loan. It can be tax deductible, and we're either gonna take the same amount as the interest payment back out from RRSP, so we pay no tax, or we might take even more, so we pay on a reduced tax. Now, the pros of doing this, first of all, is you have a much higher chance of avoiding OAS clawback, which starts at 90K taxable income for 2024. The max OAS you can get for 2024 is $713. This requires you to stay in Canada for 40 years between 18 all the way until you start your OAS. So by drawing RRSP aggressively early on, later on you lose that part of taxable income. So that's why you can keep a lot more of the OAS. Now, another pro is you now may even qualify for GIS, which is Guaranteed Income Supplement. This is an extra payment that will go towards the low income family, and you only get it once you start your OAS. The max GIS for 2024 is $1,065. However, because this is for low income family, the income threshold is actually quite low in order to qualify for GIS. It is at $21,000 if you're single and $28,000 if you're in a family. One thing to note is that OAS income doesn't count towards this GIS calculation, while your CPP and your RRSP withdrawal does count towards it. Now, another pro of drawing RRSP early is that you may enjoy a lower tax bracket going forward. And finally, because RRSP is taxable, all becomes your income for your final tax year upon death. By not having RRSP anymore because you draw it early, you likely may have a much lower estate tax for your family. This aggressive strategy do have their own cons as well. The first is withholding tax. So withholding tax goes up as you draw more RRSP. If you draw over 15,000, it is going to be 30%. Now, this doesn't mean you're paying 30%, but the government is taking 30% upfront, and you may get to claim some of it back when it comes to April if your overall tax rate is lower than 30%. Now, the next con is that once you're over 65, if you have RIF payment or any of these payments on this list, you are entitled to a $2,000 pension tax credit, which translates to around $300 of tax saved every year. By depleting your RRSP early, and if you don't have any of these things on the list, you are missing out on this tax credit. Now, the last con is sometimes we see when people come to us after they have aggressively drawn from their RRSP, they have funds sitting in their non-registered or TFSA account. This often leads to overspending because now they don't have that secondary consideration because of potential tax implication. They no longer have to worry about that, and they're more prone to spend more. So this might actually end up hurting them from a behavior perspective. All right, next group is the type that are saying, hey, we should push the RRSP until 71. Let's delay that tax as much as possible. Usually what they will do here is they try to limit the RRSP to as little as possible. They probably work on depleting the non-register or TFSA first. They're really trying to push RRSP until 71 for that RIF payment, and then they will just spend out of the RIF from there on. Now, the pros of doing this is you do actually enjoy relatively low tax rate up front because you're depleting those more tax efficient accounts. And also because you have RRSP for later, so for sure you're going to have a RIF, which means you will enjoy that $2,000 pension tax credit. You also do get to keep growing your money tax deferred within the RRSP. And finally, this pro is not relevant for most people, but RRSP is creditor protected, whereas non-registered and TFSA aren't, unless you're doing it inside a segregated funds. So if you have debt with other creditors, maybe you're running a business, you might want to deplete your non-registered or TFSA first, get rid of those money first. So everything you're left with is RRSP, and then even if your business do fail or something happens to it, you're still going to keep that retirement fund inside. Alright, so what is the con here? So first of all is that if your RRSP grows large enough, once you turn it into a RIF later on, you are forced to take that minimum percentage, which you will see on a chart here, and that might translate to quite a bit of taxable income, which means quite high tax bracket. Another con is that because now you have a higher taxable income, it might start affecting your OAS, so you might get some clawback, and it might turn you from qualifying for a little bit of GIS to no GIS at all. And finally, by pushing RRSP later on, this is likely going to be your sole investment account later in your life stage. If you pass away without a spouse to roll this over to, you will end up having to pay a pretty substantial estate tax once you pass away, which means less inheritance for your family. So if leaving a larger inheritance for a family might be a concern here, not just your own retirement planning, then there might be more merits to have RRSPs withdrawn earlier. Okay, so who is right here? What do we actually see when we do financial planning or retirement planning for people? Actually, typically, when we do planning for clients, more often than not, the solution is actually the middle of the two. You do want to draw a little bit of RRSP once you retire if it will help you maximize that lower tax bracket range. So let me explain. Let's take BC for example. In the federal tax bracket, you pay 15% tax on the first 55K of income. And for BC, you pay 5% on the first 47K. So what that means is, let's say once you retire, you're drawing from all these different accounts and you're not yet hitting that 47K, but you have enough money to spend. What you might want to consider doing is draw a little bit extra from your RRSP room. Make sure you're maximizing that lower 20% tax bracket, and then use those RRSP that you don't need to fund your TFSA if you still have room every year. So you're essentially transferring a little bit of RRSP upfront every year during retirement into your TFSA, growing it for later use in life, and then pass it on to your family because now they don't have to pay tax, so your estate value is actually much higher. And the best way to visualize this is, let's look at a retirement example together within a planning software. So let's look at an example, and we're going to keep it simple. This is a single person retiring at 65. He worked all his life. He has an average CPP of about $800 and a max OAS, 50K cash, 250K RRSP, 150K TFSA. Let's say recently his parents passed away. He got a pretty sizable inheritance. He put it into his non-registered account. He has about 150K, which is pretty common sometimes when we plan with clients. And let's say they're all growing at 4% after fee. He is spending about 50K a year indexed to inflation, and he's projected to live until he's 99. So we can see that with this example, with a little bit of GIS in the middle, with a bit more towards the end, of course, because we've depleted non-registered and our RRSP, we're just spending out of our TFSA, which is not taxable. Now what's cool here is the planning software has AI built in, so it will give us all possible scenarios that we can go through. And here we're first gonna visit the group that are trying to draw down RRSP aggressively. Now obviously we're going to pay hefty tax up front, but because of this, you can see on the chart as a comparison, we are going to end up with more GIS over our lifetime, of course, because we now have much lower taxable income every year. However, even though we end up with more government benefit than the first default example, we're actually not better off in this projection. Our estate value by the time we're 99 actually is lower than the first case. And this program has a built-in probability of success as well. Our success rate is actually lower as well. Now, the reason why is because of the con we just went through before. By taking out your RRSP early, we end up paying a lot of tax upfront, which means we're starting with a much smaller pot, and that has difficulty to grow, despite the fact that we get supplemented on the other side with a higher government benefit. Alright, now let's look at the opposite. What if we try to push as much RRSP as possible until we're 71 and beyond? And of course, if we compare to the GIS over lifetime by the time we're 99 to the last example, we can see that it is much lower because we have depleted TFSA upfront, and then all the withdrawal afterwards is going to be taxable. Now here we can see that our estate value is actually higher than the last example. But remember, RRSP has to all be taxed at the final year of your death if you don't have a spouse to roll over. So I would argue that after tax, your net estate value is going to be lower actually, so you're not better off. So here we can see that by being more extreme, aggressively taking RRSP up front or pushing it all the way to the back actually doesn't really help you. It's both worse off versus the standard case of just being more spread out and taking more accounts. Now let's look at a third example, a third option, which is taking the middle of the road, and it's going to work out much better, even better than the default case. Here, what we're going to do is we are going to purposely draw a little bit more RRSP every year since retirement up to that lowest tax bracket. And then we will be using that surplus that we don't need for spending to fund our TFSA. This TFSA is going to keep growing at 4%, push it off to later on for the final retirement years, and then it's going to become our estate. Now, looking at this projection, all things the same, you will notice that not only our estate value is much higher than the first three, we also improve our retirement likelihood slightly by about 1%. This also is tax efficient for our estate because we have everything just TFSA at the final years, and all that is going to be directly going to our beneficiary. So as you can see, by taking a little bit of middle of the road solution instead of being extreme, it actually can serve you better. Now, obviously, every case is different. If you want to find the best solution for yourself, this is where I'm going to recommend you actually need to work with a financial planner, do quite a bit of projections to really find the solution that fits you. But if you're just trying to work this out yourself, there are actually 7 things I would urge you to keep in mind from this. The first is make sure you have some RRIF pension income once you're past 65, or at least something that we've seen on the list here to ensure you get that $2,000 pension tax credit. Second is if you don't qualify for GIS anyway, you might want to take extra from either your non-registered or RRSP to maximize that lower tax bracket. Number 3 is if you don't have anything other than a RRSP, that's the only taxable account you have, this is where you actually might want to draw down aggressively just so you may qualify for a higher GIS going forward. But this requires quite a bit of planning and projection, so make sure you're working with a planner on this. Number 4 is, I would say a lot of people like to talk about GIS, but they over-index and they sacrifice too much just to get it. Again, don't pay too much attention to it. You want to focus on the overall financial health and the retirement projection, not just focusing on getting extra money from government. However, number 5, in some province, I think Nova Scotia or Newfoundland, you need to have at least $1 of GIS in order to qualify for a medical card, which gives you supplement towards like pills and all that stuff. So in this case, that's an extra benefit, and you might need to account that to be part of your projection to see the real value of having at least some GIS. Number 6 is be realistic about the likelihood of OAS clawback. A lot of people often when they retire, they tell me, oh, I'm so worried about OAS clawback, this is why I'm not drawing from this account or this account this year. But realistically, you need to have 90K plus taxable income to start OAS clawback, which is actually very, very difficult for most people to do, even if you have a very good pension. So I would say be more realistic about this issue. I would say 80% of people actually don't need to worry about a clawback. And finally, make sure you prioritize estate value if there's something of a concern. If you want to be more tax efficient, this is where, again, you might want to focus on drawing down your RRSP or non-reg first and have TFSA later on. This is where, again, the middle of the road solution might be for you. Alright, so that's everything for this week. I thought it was pretty interesting since I am talking about a lot of drawdown sequence with some of my clients into retirement. I thought I'll make a video on this topic. And I'm also curious to hear from you. How are you drawing down your retirement accounts? Which one are you prioritizing first? And what is the reason for that? Let me know in the comment down below. Now, if you like these kind of videos, I do upload them every 2 weeks. Next week, I'm going to hop over back to my Chinese channel and talk about another topic. So if you understand Chinese, you want to get a little bit more content, you can visit over there as well. Other than that, make sure you subscribe to the channel, click the bell button so you get all the notifications in the future. Alright, this is Jackie Cole. I hope you found this interesting. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye!